Ambassador Jinwoo's fingers drummed silently against his thigh, a nervous habit he'd developed over 20 years of diplomatic service. The crystalline chambers of the Galactic Council stretched impossibly high above him, their surfaces refracting starlight into dancing rainbows that would have been beautiful if not for the tension crackling through the air like static electricity. The Zalari delegates across from him were a sight to behold, even after all these years. Their bodies seemed crafted from moonbeams and spider silk, gossamer wings that shimmered with each breath they took. Trade Minister Veil of Stars, their leader, stood barely 4 feet tall, but commanded respect across 3 star systems. Right. Now, though, she looked like she might faint. Jinwoo had learned early in his career that Zalari could literally die from shock. Their nervous systems, evolved on a world where the loudest sound was falling leaves, couldn't handle sudden movements or loud noises. A human's normal walking pace appeared to them like a charging predator. A casual handshake could crush their delicate bone structure like paper. The mining rights on Kepler 442b, Jinwoo whispered, his voice so soft that the chamber's audio enhancers had to amplify it for the other delegates to hear. Terra agrees to the proposed extraction limits, 30% of rare Earth elements, with full environmental restoration protocols. Veil of Stars' antennae twitched with what Jinwoo had learned was relief. Her translator, a small floating device that looked like a glowing soap bubble, conveyed her response in melodic tones that sounded like wind chimes. The Zalari Confederacy is grateful for Terra's restraint in this matter, the translation came through. Your species continues to surprise us with its wisdom. Jinwoo's restraint badge pulsed a steady blue on his collar, monitoring his heart rate, muscle tension, and hormone levels. If any of these spiked beyond acceptable parameters, the device would inject him with mild sedatives. It was uncomfortable, but necessary. The first human diplomat to meet the Zalari had accidentally caused a panic attack simply by sneezing. The poor delegate had spent 3 days in their medical facility, convinced that humans were preparing for war. Across the station, Captain Minho was conducting his morning briefing in the human section of the diplomatic quarters. His crew of 12 moved through the briefing room with practiced grace, each step calculated to avoid the motion sensors that would alert their alien colleagues to any sudden activity. Navigation report, Minho said, his voice barely audible. Even to his own crew. They'd all learned to read lips years ago. Lieutenant Hei Young stepped forward, her movements fluid as water. In her natural state, she could cross the room in 2 quick strides. Now she took 15 careful steps, each one deliberate and slow. Course plotted for the Vorthak system, sir. Their delegation needs transport to the Peace Summit on Harmony Station. Minho nodded approvingly. The Vorthak were among the more robust species in the galaxy, resembling large furry bears with 6 arms and crystalline eyes. They could actually survive a human's normal movement speed, though they still found it alarming. Baby steps, Minho thought. After 3 centuries, the galaxy was slowly getting used to sharing space with Deathworlders. The term still made him uncomfortable. Deathworlders, as if they were monsters instead of beings who simply evolved on a planet that tried to kill everything on it every single day. Earth had been a harsh teacher, but it had made humanity adaptable in ways that most species couldn't comprehend. Communications Officer Yu Jin raised her hand slightly, a gesture that would have been invisible to most species, but which every human in the room noticed immediately. Sir, we're receiving some unusual chatter from the Outer Rim territories. The Keth Empire has been moving ships into neutral space. The room fell silent. Even whispered, the name Keth carried weight in galactic politics. They were one of the few species that came close to matching humanity's physical capabilities, though they'd evolved on a world of endless warfare rather than one of constant environmental hazards. Where humans had learned to adapt and survive, the Keth had learned to conquer and dominate. What kind of movement? Minho asked, his restraint badge flickering from blue to yellow as his stress levels rose slightly. Patrol ships mostly, but they're pushing deeper into the neutral zone. Each day, the Floran Republic has filed formal complaints twice this week. Minho's jaw tightened. The Floran were perhaps the most peaceful species in the galaxy. plant-like beings who had achieved interstellar travel through pure curiosity rather than any desire for expansion. Their homeworld was a garden paradise, where beings from across the galaxy came to study botany and meditation. The idea of the Keth threatening them was like watching a wolf circle a field of flowers. Meanwhile, deep in the outer rim, something that would change everything was already in motion. Keth Admiral Vortak stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Crimson Talon, watching the peaceful lights of Floran Prime through the viewscreen. His species had evolved from pack hunters, their scaled hides scarred by countless battles for survival on their harsh homeworld. The humans, his tactical officer hissed through pointed teeth, they have grown soft with their protocols. 3 centuries of playing gentle with the weak species has made them forget what it means to fight. Vortak's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile on another species, but was pure predatory instinct on a Keth. Then perhaps it is time to remind the galaxy that strength belongs to those willing to use it. The pieces were falling into place. The galaxy's careful balance, maintained for 300 years by human restraint and diplomatic wisdom, was about to be tested in ways no one could imagine. In the council chambers, Jinwoo felt a chill run down his spine, despite the warm, artificial atmosphere. His restraint badge pulsed steadily, unaware that soon, very soon, it would become irrelevant. The first thing Hyejin noticed wasn't the alarm that should have been blaring across Lunar Station's communication center. It was the silence. At S347 Standard Time, the Outer Rim monitoring stations always had background chatter, the gentle hum of peaceful civilizations going about their daily lives. Tonight, there was nothing. She leaned forward in her chair, adjusting the long-range sensors with practice movements that were still carefully measured, despite being alone in the human section of the station. Her restraint badge glowed blue in the dim light, a constant reminder that even here, even now, she had to maintain the careful facade that had kept galactic peace for 3 centuries. The first transmission burst through the static like a scream. "This is Floran Prime emergency broadcast," the voice crackled through her headset. But it wasn't the melodic wind chime quality she was used to from Floran Communications. This voice was raw with terror. "We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack." Hyejin's fingers flew over her console, her movements still controlled, but faster now. The main viewer flickered to life, showing the outer rim where Floran Prime should have been a glowing jewel of green and gold. Instead, she saw fire. The famous healing groves where beings from across the galaxy came to find peace and recover from their troubles were burning. Plasma fire rained from the sky in sheets of blue-white death, turning 1,000-year-old trees into vapor and ash. The crystalline meditation domes that had stood for millennia cracked and melted under the assault. Keth warships hung in space above the planet like vultures, their angular hulls bristling with weapons that continued to pour destruction onto the helpless world below. Their ships were brutal things, all sharp edges and aggressive lines, built by a species that had learned to fight before they'd learned to dream. "Dr. Morning Bloom," Hyejin whispered, recognizing one of the voices cutting through the chaos. She'd met the Floran botanist 6 months ago during a cultural exchange. They'd shared tea made from flowers that bloomed only once every 7 years, and Dr. Morning Bloom had shown her seeds that could grow into entire forests given enough time and care. "Please," came the desperate transmission, and Hyejin could hear the sound of explosions in the background. "Anyone who can hear this, help us. We have no weapons, no defenses. We are gardeners, not warriors. Our children—" The signal dissolved into static. Hyejin's hands shook as she tried to re-establish contact, her restraint badge flickering yellow as her stress levels spiked. She'd been monitoring communications for 15 years, had heard distress calls before, but nothing like this. The Floran weren't just peaceful, they were defenseless. Their entire civilization was built around growing things, healing things, making the galaxy more beautiful one plant at a time. Within 30 minutes, the emergency session of the Galactic Council was in full swing. The great chamber buzzed with activity as delegates from dozens of species filled their designated sections. The Aquali floated in their water-filled pods, their tentacles writhing with agitation. The Vorthak delegation sat in meditation poses, but their crystalline eyes betrayed their concern. Even the usually calm Zenthari seemed disturbed, their metallic skin shifting colors with emotion. Marine Colonel Dong-hyun stood in the human section, his posture perfect, despite the rage building inside him like a volcano about to erupt. His restraint badge pulsed steadily, working overtime to keep his body chemistry in check. Around him, other human delegates maintained their careful composure, but he could see the strain in their eyes. The casualty reports kept coming. The Floran had no military, no evacuation procedures, no concept of warfare beyond ancient historical texts. They died tending their gardens, trying to protect seedlings that had been growing for centuries. Entire families of botanists wiped out while trying to save their life's work. The Galactic Council calls for an immediate diplomatic response, announced Chancellor Zeph-99, the ancient Zenthari who had led the council for over a century. We must send a strongly worded condemnation to the Keth Empire. A fact-finding mission, suggested the Aquali delegate, her translated voice bubbling through the chamber's speakers. We need to understand the Keth's motivations before we act. Rashly, Dong-hyun watched the debate unfold with growing disbelief. Diplomatic protests, economic sanctions. The Vorthak delegate actually suggested forming meditation circles to send peaceful thoughts toward the Keth fleet. The Floran were dying right now, and the galaxy's leaders wanted to write letters. Perhaps we could arrange a cultural exchange, offered another delegate. Help the Keith understand the value of the Floran gardens. That was when something snapped inside Dong-hyun. His restraint badge flashed red for a split second before he reached up and tore it from his collar. The small device hit the crystalline floor with a metallic ring that somehow carried farther than the loudest weapon. In the sudden silence that followed, every delegate in the chamber turned to stare at the human section. 300 years, Dong-hyun said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the chamber. Around him, other humans began removing their own badges, the soft metallic sounds like raindrops on stone. 300 years we've played by your rules, moved slowly so we wouldn't frighten you, whispered so we wouldn't hurt your hearing, pretended to be weak so you could sleep peacefully. He held up his restraint badge, the blue light now dim and fading. We became gardeners and diplomats and engineers because you asked us to. We hid what we really were because you were afraid of us, and you know what? You should have been. The Zalari delegate fainted. The Vorthak began chanting protective mantras. Even the normally unflappable Zenthari took a step backward. The Terran restraint protocol, Dong-hyun continued, crushing the badge in his fist, is hereby terminated. We tried peace. We tried diplomacy. We tried being what you wanted us to be. He looked directly at the main viewer, where Floran Prime continued to burn. But some things are worth fighting for, and some fights can't be won with words. Around the chamber, every human delegate stood. Their badges hit the floor in a cascade of metallic sounds that seemed to echo forever. The children of Terra, Dong-hyun said, are no longer holding back. The message reached Mars Colony at 04:15, station time, transmitted through quantum channels that carried more than just words. It carried 3 centuries of suppressed instinct, unleashed in a single moment. Engineer So Young was in the middle of her night shift when her personal communicator chimed with the emergency broadcast from the Galactic Council. She listened to Colonel Dong-hyun's declaration while standing next to a massive hull plate that normally required a team of 6 workers and a mechanical lift to move. The plate weighed 2 tons of compressed titanium steel, designed for the outer hulls of deep space cruisers. For 300 years, humans had pretended they needed machines to handle such loads. So Young looked at her Tritonian work partner, Gelflow 97, whose aquatic form rippled with concern in his environmental suit. The Tritonians were strong by galactic standards, able to lift maybe 300 pounds in their prime. They'd always been impressed by human machinery and clever engineering. "Hey, Gel," So Young said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "You might want to step back." Without her restraint badge's constant chemical suppression, So Young felt her muscles respond the way they were meant to. She bent down, wrapped her arms around the hull plate, and lifted. The 2-ton mass came up like it weighed nothing at all. Her movements were smooth, controlled, efficient in a way that made the mechanical lifts look clumsy. Gelflow 97's aquatic form went completely still, which for a Tritonian was the equivalent of a human's jaw dropping. That should not be possible, he gurgled through his translator. A lot of things are about to become possible, So Young replied, carrying the hull plate to its mounting position with one hand while she used the other to begin the welding process. Her movements were precise, faster than any automated system, and she didn't even break a sweat. Across the station, Security Chief Jun Seo was experiencing his own moment of liberation. The main concourse of Mars Colony stretched for nearly a kilometer, a vast space filled with shops, restaurants, and meeting areas where dozens of species mingled in careful harmony. Jun Seo had always taken exactly 8 minutes to walk from one end to the other, his pace measured to avoid startling the more delicate species. Now, with his motion dampeners discarded in a waste recycler, he needed to cross the concourse in response to a minor dispute between some Aquali merchants and a Vorthak trade delegation. Jun Seo took 3 running steps and then simply moved. To the watching aliens, he seemed to vanish from one end of the concourse and reappear at the other in what looked like teleportation. In reality, he'd simply run at his natural pace, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to weave between startled aliens without touching a single one. The entire journey took 12 seconds. The Aquali merchants floated in their mobility pods, their tentacles writhing with shock. "Impossible," one of them bubbled. "The humans cannot move like that. They are slow, careful beings." "Were," Jun Seo corrected, not even breathing hard. "We were slow because you needed us to be." Captain Minho received the transmission while his ship, the Soul's Pride, was en route to transport a delegation of Vorthak mediators to a peace summit. The ship was a marvel of human engineering, though the galaxy had never seen its true capabilities. Like all human vessels, it was designed to operate far beyond what other species considered safe limits. "Navigation, plot a course for the outer." "Rim," Minho ordered, his voice carrying clearly through the bridge for the first time in years. "Maximum acceleration." His Zalari navigator, Wing Whisper Soft, fluttered nervously at her station. "Sir, the Vorthak passengers cannot survive high acceleration. Their bone structure. Transfer them to the escape pods with full life support." Minho replied. "Program the pods for automatic return to the nearest station." "Captain," Wing Whisper Soft's translator conveyed her distress, "the acceleration you're suggesting would kill most species. The G-forces alone." Minho's smile was sharp as a blade. "Most species, yes, but we're not most species, are we?" The Soul's Pride had been built to human specifications, which meant it could pull accelerations that would turn other species into paste. Its engines were capable of pushing the ship to nearly 15% of light speed in normal space, something that would have been considered impossible by galactic standards. "All hands, prepare for unrestricted acceleration," Minho announced shipwide. "If you're not human, get to the reinforced compartments now." His crew moved with a precision that would have been impossible under the old restrictions. Chief Engineer Kyung-ho had the engines running at 120% capacity within seconds, levels that would have terrified any other species. Navigation Officer Su Jin plotted jump coordinates while pulling G-forces that should have knocked her unconscious. The Soul's Pride leaped forward like a predator finally released from its cage. Behind them, the automatic systems launched the Vorthak delegation in their escape pods, complete with apologies and promises of alternative transportation. "Sir," Wing Whisper Soft managed to whisper, her delicate form pressed back into her specially designed acceleration couch, "this is impossible. No ship can move like this." "No ship piloted by your species," Minho corrected. "But we built this ship. We built it to our specifications, not yours." Throughout human space, the same scene played. Out on dozens of ships, captains pushed their vessels beyond what the galaxy thought possible. Engineers worked with superhuman precision and speed. Soldiers moved with reflexes that seemed almost magical to other species. The Terra's resolve broke the hyperspace speed record, its human crew riding accelerations that would have liquefied most aliens. The new Soul performed maneuvers that defied physics as understood by galactic science. The Mount Fuji simply vanished from sensors, moving faster than most species could even track. Within hours, the human fleet was racing toward the outer rim, no longer the careful guardians the galaxy knew, but something far more dangerous. 300 years of restraint had hidden the truth from the galaxy, but now that truth was unleashed. They weren't just humans. They were the children of a death world, apex predators who had chosen to be protectors, and for the first time in 3 centuries, they were showing the galaxy what that really meant. The hunt was on. Admiral Keith Vash stood on the bridge of his flagship, Crimson Dominion, watching the tactical display with the confidence of a predator who had never known defeat. Around him, the Keith fleet stretched across space in perfect formation, their angular warships bristling with weapons that had conquered a dozen systems in the past year. "The humans approach," his tactical officer reported, scaled hands dancing. "Over the control surfaces, their fleet formation is unusual." Keith Vash's lips pulled back in a predatory grin. "Unusual how?" "They're not maintaining standard attack patterns. No organized formations, no predictable approach vectors. It's as if they're—" The officer paused, confusion evident in his voice. "As if they're hunting." Before Keith Vash could respond, alarms began screaming throughout the bridge. The impossible had just happened. A human destroyer had materialized inside their defensive perimeter, past their sensor nets, past their early warning systems, right in the heart of their formation. Captain Yunji's Busan Thunder hung in space. Like a dark angel of death, its hull scarred from pushing through hyperspace at speeds that should have torn it apart. The ship's weapons were already charging, targeting systems locked onto the Keith command vessel before they could even react. "How?" Keith Vash snarled, his claws extending as battle fury took hold. "That's impossible. No ship can make a hyperspace jump that precise." On the Busan Thunder, Captain Yunji was discovering what her ship could really do when pushed by a crew that was no longer holding back. Her navigator, Wan Shik, was pulling calculations that would have taken other species hours to complete, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to process spatial mathematics in real time. "Navigation locked," he reported, his voice steady despite the crushing G-forces. "Ready for combat maneuvers." "Weapons," Yunji called out, her body perfectly adapted to the acceleration that would have turned most aliens into red mist. "Target." Their command ship, full spread. The Busan Thunder opened fire with a precision that defied everything the Keth knew about space combat. Instead of the slow, methodical exchange of fire that characterized most galactic warfare, the human ship moved like a living thing. It rolled, dived, and twisted through space with movements that seemed to anticipate the Keith return fire before it was even launched. "Impossible," Keith Vash breathed, watching his carefully planned defensive formations crumble under the assault. "They're moving like they can read our minds." In a way, they could. 300 years of careful observation had taught humans exactly how other species fought. Every tactic, every maneuver, every predictable response was catalogued in their military databases. The Keth fought like they had evolved to fight, following patterns that had served them well against other civilized species, but humans had evolved to hunt the unpredictable predators of Earth. "Boarding pods incoming," the tactical officer reported, his voice cracking with strain. "But they're not following standard approach vectors. They're using our own ship's movement against us." Marine Sergeant Tae-jun rode the boarding pod like a surfer riding a wave, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to guide the small craft through the maze of Keth weapons fire. Around him, his squad of 12 Marines prepared for what would be the first real combat humans had seen in 3 centuries. The pod slammed into the Crimson Dominion's hull with enough force to breach the armor plating. Tae-jun was first through. The breach, his movements flowing like water as he adapted to the ship's artificial gravity. The Keith defenders were waiting, their scaled forms bristling with weapons and centuries of warrior instinct. They had never faced anything like him. Tae-jun moved through the corridors like a ghost, his enhanced senses allowing him to detect the Keth ambushes before they happened. His squad followed, each Marine a weapon of flesh and bone that had been forged in the crucible of Earth's deadliest environments. The Keth fought bravely, but they fought like they had always fought, with tactics that had served them well against other species. They expected their enemies to fight in formations, to follow predictable patterns, to be limited by the same physical constraints that bound most galactic civilizations. Instead, they faced humans who could think and react faster than their weapons, could track, who could anticipate their moves and counter them before they were even made. The battle for the Crimson Dominion became a masterclass in adaptive combat, with human marines flowing through the ship's corridors like a tide of controlled destruction. "Secure the bridge," Taejun ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. "And remember, we want prisoners." The fighting lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it was over, Admiral Kethvash found himself on his knees looking up at a human marine who had somehow appeared behind him without triggering a single alarm. "Your surrender, Admiral," Taejun said quietly, "or we finish this the hard way." Throughout the fleet, the same scene played out on ship after ship. Human boarding parties moved through Keth vessels with surgical precision, their enhanced abilities allowing them to overcome defenses that had held against other species for generations. The Keth surrender came through on all frequencies as their military leadership found themselves captured, their expansion fleet in ruins. Admiral Sang-ho stood on the bridge of his flagship, Seoul's Vengeance, watching the wreckage of what had once been the galaxy's most feared military force. The battle had lasted 6 hours, but it had felt like minutes. 3 centuries of restraint had hidden the truth from the galaxy, but now that truth was on full display. "Open galaxy-wide communications," he ordered, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came from unleashing humanity's true potential. The transmission went out on all frequencies, reaching every corner of civilized space. On Aquali Prime, the floating cities listened in stunned silence. On Vorthak, the meditation temples fell quiet. Even the ancient Zenthari stopped their endless calculations to hear what the humans had to say. "This is Admiral Sang-ho of the Human Defense Fleet," he began, his image broadcast to 1 billion worlds. "For 300 years we have moved slowly so as not to frighten you. We have whispered so as not to hurt your hearing. We have hidden our strength so you could sleep peacefully at night." He gestured to the floating wreckage of the Keth fleet, their once mighty warships now drifting hulks in space. "This is what restraint looked like," he said simply. "We chose to be gentle because we cared about you. That care has not changed, but now you know what we are capable of when someone threatens those under our protection." The transmission ended, leaving the galaxy in stunned silence. The children of Earth had revealed themselves at last, and the universe would never be the same. The ruins of Floran Prime stretched endlessly under twin suns that had once shone down on gardens of impossible beauty. Where the famous healing groves had stood for millennia, only charred earth and twisted metal remained. The air still tasted of smoke and loss 3 weeks after the Keth attack had ended. Ambassador Jin Woo walked slowly through what had once been the Heart Grove, where beings from across the galaxy had come to find peace. His footsteps crunched on crystallized soil, each sound a reminder of the violence that had shattered this world. For the first time in his diplomatic career, he moved at his natural pace, no longer hiding behind the careful restraint that had defined human-alien relations for 3 centuries. Behind him, representatives from 47 species followed in a procession that would have been impossible just weeks ago. Aquali floated in their mobility pods, their tentacles moving in slow patterns of mourning. Vorthak delegates walked with measured steps, their crystalline eyes reflecting the destroyed landscape. Even the proud Zenthari had come, their metallic forms dulled with what might have been grief, but it was the surviving Floran who drew every eye. Dr. Night Blooming Moss stood at the center of the memorial grove, her plant-like form swaying gently, in the breeze that carried the scent of ash instead of flowers. She was one of only 300 Floran who had survived the orbital bombardment, saved by pure chance when they were working in the deep root chambers beneath the surface. "We gather here," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality that made Floran's speech sound like wind chimes, "to remember what was lost, but also to understand what was saved." Jin Woo stepped forward, and for the first time in his career, he didn't moderate his presence. He stood at his full height, moved with the fluid grace that came naturally to his species, spoke in a voice that carried clearly without electronic amplification. The other species watched him with a mixture of awe and fear that he was finally beginning to understand. 300 years ago, he began, humanity made a choice. We chose to hide what we were so that you could feel safe sharing the galaxy with us. We moved slowly, spoke softly, pretended to be weak because your comfort mattered more to us than our own nature. A Zalari delegate fluttered nervously in the back of the crowd, her gossamer wings catching the light. Beside her, an Aquali's translator bubbled with quiet distress. They were seeing humans as they truly were for the first time, and the reality was overwhelming. Vat the Keth, Jinwu continued, his voice hardening, mistook our kindness for weakness. They saw our restraint as an invitation. They looked at the peace we had built and decided to tear it down. Dr. Night Blooming Moss stepped closer, her movement still graceful despite the trauma she had endured. I want to tell you something, she said, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the stillness. When the attack began, when the sky burned and our world died around us, I called for help and you came. She turned to face the human delegation, her expression mixing wonder with something that might have been fear. We thought you were gentle because you were weak, she whispered. We never realized you were gentle because you were strong. Jinwu nodded slowly, his expression solemn. Strength without compassion is tyranny, he replied. Compassion without strength is impotence. We chose to be both, even when it meant hiding our true nature from those we had sworn to protect. The memorial service continued for hours, with each species offering their own traditions of remembrance. But underneath the formal ceremonies, something more important was happening. The galaxy was learning to see humanity not as the careful, restrained diplomats they had pretended to be, but as the apex predators who had chosen to be guardians. Captain Minho stood at the edge of the gathering, his ship, Soul's Pride, visible in the sky above as it maintained a protective orbit around the wounded world. His communication device chimed softly with new orders from Fleet Command, and he stepped away from the crowd to read them, patrol routes throughout the Outer Rim, defense assignments for vulnerable worlds, protection details for species that had no means of defending themselves. The galaxy had many peaceful civilizations, and now they all knew what watched over them in the darkness between the stars. Sir, his communications officer reported through the device, we're receiving requests for protection from 14 systems. The Aquali are asking for permanent human presence in their space. The Tritonian colonies want defensive platforms. Even the Xanthari are requesting consultation on their security protocols. Minho smiled, an expression that would have terrified other species just weeks ago, but now carried the weight of absolute security. Acknowledge all requests, he replied. Let them know that Earth's children are listening. As the formal ceremonies concluded, the various species began to disperse, but many lingered, approaching the human delegates with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The Aquali wanted to understand how human ships could move so fast. The Vorthak were fascinated by human combat techniques. Even the usually aloof Xanthari were asking questions about human technology and capabilities. For 3 centuries, the galaxy had lived in carefully maintained ignorance of what their protectors really were. Now, that ignorance was lifting like morning fog, revealing a truth that was both terrifying and comforting. Dr. Night Blooming Moss approached Jinwu as the crowd thinned, her plant-like features showing the strain of recent trauma, but also something new. Hope, perhaps, or simply understanding. Will it be different now, she asked. The galaxy, I mean. Now that everyone knows? Jinwu looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, each one representing worlds that humanity had, quietly protected for generations. The choice remains the same, he said, remembering words his grandmother had spoken when he was young. The strong protect the weak, not because they must, but because they choose to. He turned back to her, his expression gentle but carrying an undertone of steel that hadn't been there before. But now everyone knows the true cost of threatening those under our protection. Above them, the Soul's Pride moved across the sky, like a guardian angel, its human crew no longer hiding what they were, no longer pretending to be less than they could be. Across the galaxy, Other human ships took up similar positions, silent sentinels watching over worlds that were finally beginning to understand what had been protecting them all along. The memorial service was over, but its message would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. The children of Earth had revealed themselves at last, and the universe would never forget the day the Deathworlders stopped holding back. The stars themselves bore witness to humanity's promise.